On April 26, 1986, at exactly 1:23 a.m., a routine safety test turned into humanity's worst nightmare. Inside reactor number 4 at Chernobyl, the core temperature skyrocketed to 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than the surface of the sun. The explosion that followed released 400 times more radioactive material than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. But here's what they don't tell you in the history books. In the hours after that explosion, while the world slept, hundreds of men walked toward that inferno. Not away from it. Toward it, they knew what awaited them. They knew the invisible enemy tearing through their cells with every breath. They knew that their DNA was being shredded apart, molecule by molecule, and they went anyway. This is the story of the nuclear reactor workers, the men who operated the most dangerous machines ever created by human hands. The men who quite literally stared death in the face every single shift for decades. Welcome back to Iron and Memory. Before we dive into the disasters, you need to understand what made nuclear work different from every other deadly job in industrial history. When a coal miner went underground, he could see the danger, the crumbling tunnel, the explosive gas, the flooding water. When a steel worker approached a blast furnace, he could feel the danger, the 2,900-degree heat radiating from the molten iron, the shaking ground, the roaring flames. But radiation was different. You couldn't see it, you couldn't smell it, you couldn't hear it coming. One moment you're turning a valve, the next moment you've absorbed a lethal dose, and you won't even know it for hours, sometimes days. Let me explain what radiation actually does to the human body, because it's far worse than most people imagine. When high-energy particles pass through your body, they rip electrons away from your atoms. Your cells, the building blocks of your entire existence, start falling apart at the molecular level. Your DNA, the instruction manual that tells your cells how to function, gets shredded. Imagine taking the blueprint for a building and running it through a paper shredder while the construction crew is still trying to read it. At low doses, your body can repair some of this damage. At moderate doses, you get radiation sickness, nausea, vomiting, internal bleeding. But at the doses these men encountered, your bone marrow stops producing blood cells, your intestinal lining dissolves, your immune system collapses, your organs liquefy from the inside out. And here's the truly horrifying part. You're conscious through most of it. A normal person receives about 3 millisieverts of radiation per year from natural sources, the sun, the ground, cosmic rays. A chest x-ray gives you about 0.1 millisieverts. The workers at Chernobyl? Some of them absorbed 50,000 millisieverts in a single shift. That's not a typo. 50,000. The lethal dose for a human being is around 5,000 millisieverts. These men absorbed 10 times the lethal dose, and they kept working. Let me take you inside a nuclear reactor, because most people have no idea what these men actually did every day. At the heart of every nuclear power plant sits the reactor core, a massive vessel containing hundreds of uranium fuel rods, each one approximately 12 feet long and weighing around 1,500 pounds. When uranium atoms split apart in a process called fission, they release enormous amounts of heat, enough heat to boil water and create steam. That steam turns turbines. Those turbines generate electricity. Simple, right? Wrong. Because controlling a nuclear chain reaction is like trying to tame a dragon. One small mistake, one valve stuck open, one pump that fails at the wrong moment, and that dragon breaks free. Nuclear reactor operators worked in control rooms surrounded by hundreds of gauges, switches, and warning lights. They monitored core temperature, which could spike without warning. They watched coolant pressure because loss of coolant meant meltdown. They tracked neutron flux because too high and the reaction goes critical. They checked radiation levels throughout the facility. They tested emergency cooling systems. They verified backup power systems every single second. One operator I researched described it this way. It was like being a surgeon operating on a patient who's having a heart attack while sitting on a bomb while the building is on fire. But the operators had it easy compared to the maintenance crews. These were the men who had to enter the reactor building itself, sometimes while the reactor was still running, to repair pipes, replace valves, fix pumps. They wore protective suits that did almost nothing against the radiation. They carried dosimeters that clicked faster and faster as they approached the hot zones. They had strict time limits, sometimes just 60 seconds to complete a task before their radiation exposure exceeded safe levels. 60 seconds. Try to imagine it. You climb down a ladder into a chamber filled with radioactive steam. Your dosimeter is screaming, your hands are shaking inside thick rubber gloves. You have to unscrew 8 bolts, replace a gasket, and get out. If you take too long, you absorb a dose that will shorten your life by months. Maybe years if you make a mistake. If that gasket doesn't seal properly, the reactor could fail. Thousands could die. No pressure, right? Now let's talk about what happened when things went wrong. After the Chernobyl explosion, someone had to clean up the mess. Someone had to go back inside that hellscape and prevent an even worse disaster. The Soviet government called them liquidators. Over 600,000 men were eventually sent into the Chernobyl exclusion zone. But in those first critical days, it was just a few hundred, the ones who knew they were signing their own death warrants. The most horrific job went to the men who had to clear radioactive debris off the roof of Reactor 3. Which was still operational and right next to the destroyed Reactor 4. The radiation on that roof was so intense that it destroyed the electronics in the robots they sent up first. The machines simply died, so they sent men instead. Each worker could spend exactly 90 seconds on the roof. 90 seconds to shovel radioactive graphite, pieces of a reactor core itself, and throw it back into the crater. They worked in teams of 2. Run up the stairs, shovel, throw, run back down. Some men made multiple trips. They knew what they were doing, they knew the statistics, and they did it anyway. Beneath the destroyed reactor, 3 million gallons of water had accumulated in the basement. If the molten core reached that water, the resulting steam explosion would be catastrophic, Hiroshima-level devastation, potentially rendering half of Europe uninhabitable. 3 men, Alexei Yanonenko, Valery Bespalov, and Boris Baranov, volunteered to dive into that radioactive water in complete darkness, navigate through a maze of pipes and debris, and manually open drainage valves. They were told they had perhaps a week to live. They dove anyway. Miraculously, all 3 survived, though they suffered severe radiation exposure. Even in America, with supposedly superior safety systems, disaster struck. On March 28, 1979, at the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in Pennsylvania, a cooling system failure caused a partial meltdown. For 16 hours, workers fought to prevent a full meltdown. Radiation levels inside the containment building spiked to 30,000 millisieverts per hour, lethal in under 10 minutes. Plant workers rotated in and out of high radiation areas, each one absorbing as much dose as they could safely take before the next man took over. One operator later said, "Every time we sent someone in there, we didn't know if they'd come back out." But perhaps the most horrific nuclear accident happened in Japan in 1999. At the Tokamura Nuclear Fuel Processing Facility, workers mixed uranium solution in a tank using the wrong procedure. The mixture went critical. It started an uncontrolled chain reaction. 2 workers, Hisashi Ouchi and Masato Shinohara, were standing right next to the tank when it happened. In less than 3 seconds, they absorbed more radiation than anyone had ever survived. Ouchi absorbed 17,000 millisieverts, 3 times the lethal dose. What happened to him over the next 83 days is too horrific to describe in detail. His chromosomes were completely destroyed. His body could no longer repair itself. His skin fell off in sheets. His organs failed one by one. He begged doctors to let him die. They kept him alive for 83 days. So here's the question that haunts me. Why? Why did these men do it? Why did they walk into reactor buildings knowing the risks? Why did they volunteer for suicide missions? Some did it for their families. Nuclear jobs paid well, better than almost any other industrial work. For a coal miner's son, a nuclear plant job meant a house, a car, college for the kids. Some did it out of duty. After Chernobyl, when the Soviet government asked for volunteers, thousands of men stepped forward. They understood what was at stake. They understood that if they didn't act, millions would die. Some did it because someone had to. One Chernobyl liquidator put it this way: "If we didn't go in, who would? Could you live with yourself knowing you let the world burn because you were afraid?" Here's what gets me about these men. Most of them never got recognition. No medals, no monuments, no place in the history books. The Chernobyl liquidators went back to their villages and were shunned. People feared their radiation would spread. They died quietly, often alone, from cancers that wouldn't be officially connected to their service. The 3 Mile Island operators were blamed for the accident, even though they prevented a catastrophe far worse than what happened. The maintenance workers who kept reactors running safely for decades, their names are lost to history. But without them, the modern world doesn't exist. Today, nuclear power provides about 10% of the world's electricity. In some countries, France, for example, it's over 70%. Every time you turn on a light, charge your phone, or use your computer, there's a chance that electricity came from a nuclear reactor. And there's a chance that somewhere a worker is standing in front of that reactor right now, monitoring gauges, checking systems, ready to sacrifice everything if something goes wrong. The men who operated nuclear reactors faced a unique horror. They knew exactly how they would die. Not in an explosion, not in a fire, not in a cave-in. Slowly, painfully, invisibly, their cells would betray them, their bodies would turn against them, and there would be nothing anyone could do to stop it. And yet they showed up for their shifts. They trained for years to master impossibly complex systems. They followed procedures with religious devotion. They maintained equipment that could never be allowed to fail. And when disaster struck, when the alarm sounded and the radiation levels spiked and every instinct screamed at them to run, they stayed. They stayed because someone had to. They stayed because they understood that the technology they commanded was both humanity's greatest achievement and its most dangerous creation. They stayed because they were the only thing standing between civilization and catastrophe. The nuclear reactor workers who stared death in the face daily weren't reckless. They weren't suicidal. They weren't ignorant of the risks. They were the opposite. They understood the danger better than anyone. They respected the power they wielded. And they accepted the price that came with that power. In the grand story of industrial civilization, of the men and women who built the modern world, the nuclear workers occupy a special place. They didn't just risk their lives. They sacrificed their futures, their health, their peace of mind. They lived knowing that every shift could be their last. Every alarm could be the one. Every spike in radiation levels could be the beginning of the end. They did it anyway. That's not just bravery. That's something beyond bravery. That's what it means to serve something greater than yourself. This is Iron and Memory, where we remember the men and women who built and defended modern civilization. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. There are hundreds more stories like this one. Stories of courage, sacrifice, and the terrible price of progress. And leave a comment. Would you have volunteered to be a liquidator at Chernobyl? Would you have climbed onto that radioactive roof? I'll see you on the next one.